I never liked my stepmother. That's not some bitter confession or a petty admission, it's just the truth. From the moment she walked into our lives, something felt off about her. She was charming, yes, beautiful in a perfectly curated Pinterest mom kind of way. But underneath that polished exterior was something colder, something calculating. My dad didn't see it, of course. He thought she was the best thing that ever happened to him. And maybe for a while she was. At least until the day he died and she stole everything. Let me back up. My mom passed away when I was 11. Cancer, fast, brutal. My dad took it hard, but he tried to hold things together. For me. We were close. I mean really close. He didn't always say it out loud, but he made it known in the little things, making it to every school concert, packing my lunches with dumb sticky notes, teaching me how to change a tire before I could drive. For a few years, it was just the two of us. Then came Claire. She showed up when I was 15. My dad met her at some industry networking event. She was recently divorced, had no kids, and, according to him, understood grief. That was her hook. They started dating fast. And even faster, she was spending nights at our house. Then she moved in. Then they got married. It was all within a year. At first, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. I really did. But there were red flags everywhere. She was performative. That's the best word I have for it. Always baking things she saw on Instagram. Always posting about our new blended family online while barely talking to me in real life. She had a habit of calling me sweetheart with that tight-lipped smile that never touched her eyes. Still, I kept my head down. I was 16, counting the days until college, and I didn't want to make waves. What I didn't know was that while I was trying to survive her, she was planning something much bigger. My dad had always been financially responsible. He had a modest house, no debt, and a strong life insurance policy that my mom helped him set up before she died. When I turned 18, he showed me the will. He told me he wanted me to know where everything stood, just in case. At the time, the plan was simple. The house would go to me, the life insurance payout would be split between a trust in my name and a small retirement cushion for him. If anything happened, I'd be okay. He even said it out loud, "No matter what, I made sure you're taken care of." I believed him. Then, just a few years later, he had a heart attack. Massive, sudden. One moment he was texting me about coming home for dinner. The next, I was sitting in a hospital hallway being told they couldn't save him. It wrecked me. I was 22, a senior in college. I flew home in a daze, expecting to walk into grief, into family, into memory. But when I got to the house, Claire was already there, and she wasn't crying. She was organizing. There were papers on the table, a funeral spreadsheet, calls to caterers. "Don't worry," she told me. "I'm handling everything." And just like that, she took over. I tried to be gracious, to believe she was in shock. But as the days went on, it became clear she was steering this entire thing like it was a business deal. No emotion, just logistics. She spoke to the funeral director like she was planning a dinner party. She chose a closed casket without asking me. She picked the music, some acoustic garbage my dad would have hated. When I offered to help with anything, she smiled that smile and said, "Why don't you just take care of yourself? I've got this." Then came the will. She told me the lawyer would read it with us privately, just the two of us. I showed up, dressed in black, still numb. She was already sitting at the conference table with a latte and a stack of documents. The lawyer, a man I'd never met, greeted me with a cautious look. Then he opened the file, and that's when my world split open. The will had been changed. Everything. The house, the insurance, the savings, all of it was now left to Claire. I sat there in stunned silence, thinking surely there was a mistake. I said, "My dad would never," and she cut me off. Coolly, casually. "He updated it last year," she said, flipping through the papers. Said it made more sense this way, since I'd be the one left managing everything. I stared at the lawyer, waiting, hoping he'd say something, but he just shifted uncomfortably and said, "This appears to be the most recent legally binding version." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Claire turned to me and said, "You're still young." You have your whole life ahead of you. This doesn't change anything between us." But of course, it changed everything. I didn't cry that day. Not when I left the lawyer's office, not when I got into my car, not even when I sat alone in the driveway of the house I grew up in, a house that, according to some neatly signed documents, didn't belong to me anymore. I just sat there gripping the steering wheel, staring at the place where my life used to make sense. I felt hollow, but not broken. Not yet. I spent the night in my old bedroom. Claire didn't say much when I came in. She was in the kitchen on her laptop, probably arranging catering quotes for whatever post-funeral spread she was curating. She offered me tea. I declined. We didn't speak again until the next morning. When I woke up, the house was already buzzing with visitors dropping off casseroles, sympathy cards, flowers. Claire played the grieving widow perfectly, eyes misty, voice soft. But I watched her carefully. She didn't act like someone mourning the love of her life. She acted like someone hosting a networking event. I caught her smiling, while checking the life insurance statement. That was the first time something snapped in me. Not grief, not sadness, resolve. Because I realized something in that moment. Claire didn't just win by chance. She planned this, and I was going to prove it. The first thing I did was call the lawyer who handled my father's original will. Not the guy Claire brought me to, but the one who helped draft my dad's estate plan when I was 18. I still had his contact info saved in an old email from when Dad gave me a copy of the trust documents. When I reached him, I explained who I was and asked if he had any recent records or updates on my father's file. He paused, then said, "That's strange. Your father didn't reach out after the 2017 revision. Far as I know, it hasn't changed." I froze. "Are you sure?" He double-checked. "Yes, everything was still in your name. House, trust, life insurance, standard setup." I hung up the phone and stared at the ceiling. There were 2 wills, and someone had buried one of them. I started digging. Over the next 2 weeks, I went home, back to my apartment near campus, but I didn't return to class. I filed a request for the death certificate. I asked for public records on property ownership. I called the insurance company pretending to be updating the file on behalf of the beneficiary. And then I checked the signatures on the new will, really checked them. There were inconsistencies. The notary listed on the document had a license number that no longer existed. The witness names? One was Claire's personal assistant at her old company. The other didn't even have a last name printed clearly, just an initial. The formatting on the page was different from the original version I had seen years ago. So I called a friend. My college roommate's sister was a law clerk interning at a firm that handled estate disputes. I told her everything. She didn't give me legal advice, but she told me what to look for. She even sent me an article on undue influence, a term I'd never heard before. Basically, if someone pressures or manipulates a person into changing their will, especially when they're ill, elderly, or emotionally vulnerable, that can be grounds for contesting it. If the original will was legally valid and this new one was produced under questionable circumstances, there was a chance I could have it thrown out. But that would mean taking Claire to court. Through a will update that benefited her entirely. We submitted testimony from people who had heard my dad reference the original plan within a year of his death. We highlighted the suspicious notary and witnesses. We even submitted digital metadata from a scanned email showing the original trust document still being edited just weeks before the new version mysteriously appeared. Claire tried to defend herself. Said my dad had a change of heart, that he wanted to spare me the burden of homeownership, that he trusted her to manage the funds better, that he made the changes privately of his own free will, but her story kept changing. First, she said the will update happened in March, then she said February. She couldn't remember who the notary was. She got defensive when asked why my name had been completely removed instead of just co-listed. She cracked on the stand. The judge didn't make a ruling right away, but a week later, we got the verdict. The court declared the updated will invalid due to conflict of interest, lack of independent counsel, and sufficient suspicion of undue influence. The original will, where everything was left to me, was reinstated. Claire was furious. She stormed out of the courtroom, refused to look at me. I later found out she tried to appeal the decision, but the court denied it, citing the overwhelming evidence in my favor. Just like that, the house was mine. The life insurance trust was unfrozen. And Claire? Well, she had to leave. After the judge ruled in my favor, I walked out of that courtroom with nothing but my keys, a manila folder, and a numb kind of silence ringing in my ears. I didn't even feel joy. Not yet, just the quiet relief of a nightmare finally beginning to recede. Claire, for all her theatrics, didn't say a word to me on her way out. She just stormed past like I didn't exist, heels clacking against the linoleum, sunglasses already on even though we were still indoors. She was probably already thinking of her next move, but I wasn't thinking about her anymore. I was thinking about my dad, about how he'd made me promise years ago to always fight for myself if I had to. How he'd made that will with the full intent of protecting me, and how she had nearly erased that with a few signatures and a smirk. She didn't win. And now she was going to feel what it was like to lose. It took about a week for the legal logistics to catch up to the verdict. The trust fund was unfrozen, the house title transferred back into my name, and the insurance company released the remaining balance to the original beneficiary, me. I met with the trust officer in person just to be sure. I wanted everything clean, every form signed, every account locked down and secure. Claire wasn't going to sneak her way back in again, not through paperwork, not through lawyers, and definitely not through sympathy. By the time the money hit my account, she was still living in my house. That was the next step. See, during the probate dispute, I hadn't pushed for her eviction. My lawyer advised me to wait until ownership was finalized to avoid complicating the case. But now that it was mine again, legally, fully, without question, I was free to act. I gave her 30 days. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to be civil. On the record, at least. I had my attorney send a formal notice requesting she vacate the property within the month. No harsh language, no threats. Just a clear, documented reminder that her time in my father's house was over. She didn't take it well. At first, she ignored it. Then, when she realized I wasn't bluffing, she tried negotiating. She emailed me with an offer to buy me out of the property using a mortgage loan she hadn't even applied for yet. She said she could co-own the house with me and manage it as a rental. She even claimed she had emotional equity in the home. I didn't reply. I just had my lawyer send a second notice. When that didn't work, I filed for formal eviction. She was served 2 weeks later. Then came the dramatics. She posted on Facebook, publicly, about being forced out of her own home by a greedy stepdaughter who was brainwashed by money. She made it sound like I'd tricked my father, manipulated the courts, and somehow robbed her of everything. She played the victim beautifully. But what she didn't realize was that I'd taken screenshots of everything, including all the texts and voicemails she left me before the ruling, the threatening ones, the ones where she told me I was a nobody and that my dad had only kept me around out of guilt. I sent those to my lawyer in case she tried anything stupid. She did. A week before her final move-out date, she trashed the house. I don't mean a few scuffs on the walls or forgetting to vacuum. I mean malicious damage. Cabinets torn off hinges, carpet soaked in bleach, light fixtures ripped out of the ceiling. She even smashed a mirror in my old bedroom and left glass in the carpet. And just to be extra petty, she poured milk inside the HVAC vent. It reeked. I called the police, filed a report, and submitted the damage to my insurance. I had everything photographed and documented. When they asked if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. I filed a civil suit against her for property damage and theft. She'd also taken a few things that weren't hers, like the flat-screen TV my dad had bought and a signed baseball from his childhood collection. She tried to argue that they were hers by default. The court didn't agree. Within 3 months, she was found liable for over $18,000 in damages and stolen property. She was ordered to pay restitution, and when she didn't, I went after her wages. She had to get a job to keep up with the payment plan, and I made sure the court-mandated collections were taken directly from her checks. She hated it. Meanwhile, I started restoring the house. It wasn't just about repairs. It was about taking it back on every level. I repainted the walls, replaced the ruined carpet, and fixed the cabinet doors myself. I even had the kitchen redone to match the layout from when my mom was alive. I turned the guest room, Claire's former bedroom, into a home office. I hung up my dad's old photos again. I found the cassette tapes he used to play on road trips and kept one of them in the player just for memory's sake. It felt like home again, but I didn't stop there. See, Claire had spent the better part of 2 years parading around town like the grieving widow of a local hero. She'd inserted herself into charity boards, volunteer events, and every wine club that would let her monologue about her tragic loss. She played the role of the dignified survivor so well that people forgot she had a stepdaughter. Or if they remembered me, it was as the one who moved away and didn't come back until the will was read. I was done letting her control the narrative. So I told my story. I wrote a public letter, not nasty, not accusatory, just factual, and shared it on a local blog that covered community affairs. It was titled, "What You Don't Know About My Stepmother's Inheritance Story." In it, I laid out the facts. The original will, the legal challenge, the damage she caused, and the truth about how she tried to erase me from my father's life the moment he passed. It got shared. A lot. People started whispering. Her invitations stopped coming. The charity board quietly replaced her. The wine club restructured its membership. The sympathy that had followed her like a perfume suddenly vanished. And in its place was a stench even she couldn't ignore. Accountability. She moved 3 towns over, tried to start fresh. I heard she changed her last name and tells people her ex-husband cut her off unfairly. I don't bother correcting her anymore. I don't need to. Because I have everything back now. The house, the trust, the memories, the peace. But most of all, I have the knowledge that I didn't stay silent. That I stood up when it mattered. That I didn't let a manipulative, shallow opportunist rewrite my history. Or my father's. She tried to take everything. Instead, she lost it all. There's something strange about getting everything back. You spend so much time fighting for it, obsessing over every document, every court date, every slight and injustice, that when it's finally yours again, you expect some kind of fanfare, a sense of triumph, closure. But for me, it came quietly. No parade, no emotional outburst, just silence. And for the first time in years, it was a peaceful kind of silence. After Claire moved out and the lawsuit settled, I finally had the space to think, not just about her or the damage she caused, but about what came next. What kind of life I wanted now that the dust had settled. For so long, I'd been in survival mode. Legal filings, restoration costs, insurance claims, whispers in town. Every day was reactionary. Now it was mine again. My life, my story, my home. The first thing I did was sit down and write a letter to my dad. Not a literal letter, just one of those things you do when you wish someone was still around to talk to. I poured out everything. The pain, the anger, the courtroom battles, the milk in the vent, the shattered mirror in my bedroom. But I also told him what I was doing with the house. I told him I was repainting the garage in that awful sky blue color he loved, and that I'd fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom he always swore he'd get to eventually. I told him the stereo still worked and I'd found his playlist on an old flash drive. I told him I missed him, and that I hoped he'd be proud of me. That letter sat in a drawer for a few days before I printed it out and tucked it into the lockbox with his will. Not to forget, but to close the chapter. I didn't need to reread it. I just needed to say it. The next phase of healing came slowly. It started with the kitchen table. Claire had replaced the old oak table with a modern glass one, sleek, expensive-looking, but completely out of place in our modest house. It always felt cold. So I sold it. Got almost nothing for it, but I didn't care. Then I found the table my dad and I used to eat at, the one that had been shoved into the garage and covered in boxes. I spent a weekend sanding it down, restaining the wood, and fixing one of the loose legs. When I brought it back into the kitchen, it was like something clicked into place. That table had scratches from late-night homework, a notch where I once dropped a knife trying to learn to cook, and a tiny burn mark from the time we tried to flambe bananas for dessert. It was ugly, uneven, and perfect. Little by little, I did the same with the rest of the house. Not just repairs, restorations. I turned the upstairs guest room into a reading space, filled with my mom's old books and the recliner my dad used to fall asleep in. I rebuilt the garden Claire had paved over for a patio extension, and I found a shoebox of old Polaroids in the attic, photos I hadn't seen in years. Somehow, despite all of Claire's efforts to wipe me out of the picture, my childhood still lived in the cracks of that house, and now I had the chance to make it whole again. But I wasn't just thinking about myself anymore. One afternoon, I was reorganizing the attic when I came across a folder labeled Scholarship Ideas. It was full of notes my dad had written about starting a small memorial fund in my mom's name. She'd been a teacher before she got sick, one of those beloved middle school teachers who managed to keep 12-year-olds focused for more than 3 minutes without raising her voice. My dad had wanted to honor that somehow, but never got around to it. Until now. With part of the restored inheritance, I created the Margaret Walker Memorial Scholarship, named after my mom. It was modest, just $2,000 a year for a graduating senior in our town who wanted to go into education. But I funded it myself. No GoFundMe, no donations, just my own money, in my own mother's name. The day I got the first thank you letter from a scholarship recipient, I cried for the first time since the courtroom. And not because I was sad, because I had finally transformed what had been stolen into something that could never be taken away again. As the months passed, I started speaking at local estate planning seminars. Not in a formal lecturing way, just small community events at the library or senior center. I told my story, not to trash Claire, but to warn people, to encourage them to double-check their paperwork, to choose neutral attorneys, to make sure their families knew where things stood, and to have those awkward conversations before it was too late. One man came up to me after a session with tears in his eyes and said, "My son's new wife has been pushing him to cut us out of the will. I thought maybe I was overreacting, but now I know I need to have a real talk." That one comment made it all worth it. I also started volunteering with a local group that helps people contest fraudulent wills and elder exploitation. It turns out my story wasn't rare, not even close. Every week, someone was sharing a version of what I'd gone through, but not all of them had the resources to fight. So I helped where I could, drafting letters, pointing them toward lawyers, sharing templates I'd used in my own case. Revenge had turned into prevention, and yet, every now and then, I'd hear about Claire. Not often, just whispers. A friend of a friend saw her working at a real estate firm 2 counties over. Someone else said she'd tried to get back on a nonprofit board but was politely declined. Once I saw a new Facebook profile under a different last name, Claire Mitchell, instead of Claire Walker, and couldn't help but laugh at the bio. Resilient, loyal, widowed young, but still hopeful. Hopeful, huh? She could spin whatever narrative she wanted, but the one she couldn't escape, the one that followed her through every whisper, every reference check, every side-eye at a networking event, was that she tried to rewrite someone else's story and got caught. She'd been revealed, not by a scandal, not by a viral post, but by paper, receipts, the truth. She didn't lose because I fought dirty. She lost because I fought smart, and I wasn't ashamed of it. Sometimes I still get messages, people who read my blog post, students who received the scholarship, strangers who heard about the case and want to thank me for sharing it publicly. And each time I read one of those messages, I remember sitting in that cold lawyer's office while Claire told me, "This doesn't change anything between us." She was wrong. It changed everything. She may have tried to erase me, but in the end, I made sure she was the one forgotten. It had been almost a year since I'd seen Claire in person. I wasn't counting the days, but I knew exactly how long it had been since she last stepped foot in my father's house, since she peeled out of the driveway in her dented Lexus with the back seat full of boxes and a court order hanging over her head, since I'd filed that damage report and watched her name fall from grace all over town. For a long time, I assumed that was it, that she'd vanished into the background like all disgraced opportunists do, rebranding herself in a town far away, starting fresh under a new last name, crafting a new version of events to anyone gullible enough to listen, and then she came back. It happened on a Tuesday. I had taken the day off from work to get my dad's old truck serviced. It had sat unused for months in the garage, and I'd finally decided to restore it fully. There was a place in town, Roddy's Auto, that did great work on classic models. My dad used to bring the truck there himself. I dropped it off early in the morning, then walked down the street to grab coffee. The local cafe was nearly empty. Midweek mornings were always slow in our town. Just a few retirees reading newspapers and one teenager half asleep behind the counter. I got my drink, found a corner seat, and pulled out my tablet to catch up on some documents. And then I heard her voice. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but that brittle, overly smooth tone was unmistakable. Claire. She was standing just a few feet away, ordering a double-shot vanilla oat latte like she hadn't tried to erase me from my own family less than a year ago. She hadn't seen me yet. She looked different, tired, paler. Her hair was a shade darker, more subdued, and her clothes didn't scream curated elegance the way they used to. No diamond earrings, no oversized designer purse, just a beige trench coat and a stiff smile. She seemed smaller somehow, like the air had gone out of her. I could have left, could have turned away and avoided the whole thing. But I didn't. Instead, I stood up, walked calmly to the counter, and stood right next to her. It took her a second to realize who I was, and when she did, her face froze. "Oh," she said softly. "Hi." I didn't respond immediately. I looked her up and down, then offered a neutral nod. "Claire." She fumbled with her wallet. "I didn't realize you were still here." "I live here," I said flatly. "Unlike some people, I didn't need to move away." Her mouth tightened. "I wasn't avoiding you, I just needed a break." "From what?" I asked. "Being held accountable?" That stung. I saw it in the way her eyes darted to the barista, who had wisely walked away to clean something behind the espresso machine. "I'm visiting a friend," she said, dodging. "I didn't think I'd run into anyone." "You ran into me," I said. "Surprise." She gave a weak laugh. "Look, I know things got complicated, but I really don't think we need to be enemies." I stared at her. "Enemies?" I repeated. "Claire, you forged a will. You kicked me out of my own father's legacy. You poured milk in a vent and bleached the carpets out of spite. That's not complicated, that's calculated." Her smile vanished. "I didn't forge anything," she snapped. "The court made its decision." "They did," I said calmly. "And you lost. Badly." She stepped back slightly, gripping her coffee like it was a shield. "Do you feel good about it?" she asked. "Rubbing it in like this?" "No," I replied. "I felt good the moment I walked back into my house and knew you were never coming back. This question mark. This is just a bonus." She stood in silence for a moment. For the first time ever, she didn't have a rehearsed line or a fake expression to fall back on. She looked like someone realizing that no matter how much she rebranded herself, the past would always follow her, especially in a town that remembered everything. "I loved your father," she said quietly. I didn't flinch. "You loved what he could give you, the lifestyle, the attention, the money, but you didn't love him." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't prove that." "I don't have to," I said. "You already did. The day you tried to erase me from his will was the day you showed exactly who you were." She opened her mouth to say something else, but I raised a hand. "I don't need your explanation," I said. "I don't want your apology, and I sure as hell don't forgive you." She blinked. "Even now?" "Especially now." And then I walked away. I didn't wait for her response. I didn't look back to see her reaction. I didn't even bother to finish my coffee. I left the cafe, walked back to the auto shop, and picked up my dad's truck, freshly detailed, polished to perfection. It gleamed in the sunlight. The engine purred like it was brand new. I drove it through town with the windows down, my father's old playlist on full blast. And I didn't think about Claire again for a long time. Not until I got a letter in the mail. It was from a lawyer. Not mine. Hers. Apparently, she had finally decided to file for bankruptcy. Between the judgment from the property damage, back rent on her new apartment, and a handful of credit card debts she racked up trying to maintain the image of someone she no longer was, she was underwater. She wanted to negotiate a reduction in restitution. My answer? I sent one sentence through my lawyer. Every dollar stays. And it did. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I don't think that's entirely true. At least, not for me. Revenge wasn't a singular moment, a loud confrontation, or some dramatic takedown. It wasn't when I won the court case or when I had Claire evicted. It wasn't even that uncomfortable little run-in at the cafe, though I'll admit I still smile when I think about the look on her face. No, the real revenge happened slowly, quietly, in the days and months that followed, as I rebuilt the life she tried to snatch from under me. Not just the financial parts, but the emotional ones. The things you can't write into a will or store in a bank account. Claire thought she was securing a future, that by cutting me out, she could rewrite the past and monopolize my father's legacy. But what she never understood was that you can't inherit love, you can't steal loyalty, and you can't fake a bond that was built over 2 decades of real connection. She may have won the temporary optics battle, but I won everything that mattered. It took a long time for the anger to settle. Some days it still bubbled up, like when I found something new in the house that she'd carelessly tossed aside, or when I noticed another piece of furniture missing that had sentimental value. But those moments came less often as time went on. They were replaced with moments of quiet satisfaction. Like the first time I hosted a family dinner in my dad's house again. The dining room was full. My cousins, a few of my dad's old friends, even his godson from across the state who I hadn't seen in years. We laughed, told stories, passed around way too much food. Someone made a toast, and for the first time since the funeral, my father's name was spoken without pain. He was part of the room again. Not a shadow, not a ghost, a presence. I'd spent so much energy reclaiming what Claire tried to erase that I hadn't fully realized I was doing something else too, rebuilding a legacy. Not just for me, but for him. After everything that happened, I could have turned cold, bitter. I had every reason to retreat into myself, to hoard what was mine and cut people out the way Claire had tried to cut me out. But I didn't. I opened the doors again. I turned the house into a place of welcome, not warfare, and that, in the end, was the sharpest justice of all. Claire built her life around control. She controlled appearances, controlled narratives, controlled my father's attention through guilt and charm, but I built mine around truth, around memory, around earned respect, and in the end, the people who mattered saw that. Word spread about what had happened. Small towns are like that, and while I never told the story to gain sympathy, I noticed a shift. People were warmer toward me, more willing to include me in things. I was no longer that quiet stepdaughter. I was the woman who stood her ground, who honored her parents, who didn't crumble under pressure. Even the lawyer who had originally represented Claire reached out, privately. He admitted he hadn't known the full extent of the situation and said he was reconsidering who he chooses to work with in the future. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His discomfort was enough. With the house fully restored and the scholarship fund running smoothly, I started taking better care of myself. I got back into painting, something I hadn't done since college. I signed up for a pottery class. I volunteered at the local library on weekends. I even adopted a dog, an old, grumpy lab named Walter, who snored louder than most humans and refused to sleep anywhere but the foot of my bed. And in all of that, Claire didn't exist. She had faded into the background. Her bankruptcy case dragged on for a while, but eventually her name disappeared from public court listings. She relocated again. Someone said she was renting a 1-bedroom apartment above a nail salon and working part-time doing admin work. Others said she'd left the state entirely. I didn't follow her story. I didn't need to. Because no matter where she went, she had to carry what she did. And no matter what she told people, she knew that somewhere out there was a woman she tried to erase, still standing, still living in the house she'd tried to claim, still bearing the name she tried to bury. And that's the kind of truth that no lie can outrun. I kept the voicemail she left after the ruling, just one, the one where her voice cracked and she said, "You'll regret this someday. You'll see what kind of person you really are." Sometimes I listen to it, not for anger, but for contrast, to remind myself of how far I've come, because I do see what kind of person I am. And she was dead wrong. I am someone who fought for the truth and didn't back down, someone who honored her parents even when the law, money, and fake smiles were all stacked against her, someone who won, quietly, powerfully, and completely. I'm not angry anymore. I'm at peace, and if you've made it this far, maybe you're reading this because you've seen a bit of your own story in mine. Maybe someone tried to take something from you, your legacy, your family, your voice. Maybe they made you feel small, invisible, like you didn't matter. I'm here to tell you, you do. The truth has a way of surviving, even when people work hard to bury it. So keep your records, trust your gut, ask the uncomfortable questions, stand your ground. Because people like Claire only win when we stay silent. And when we don't, they disappear, just like she did.